Mujibur Rahman's book, Shikwa-e-Hind. In the minutes that follow, I am just going to make a very brief statement as he requested me to do. When I first saw the title of Mujib's book, I was of course immediately reminded of Allama Iqbal's poem Shikwa from 1909 and Jawab-e-Shikwa from 1913. These poems, taking issue and Allah's answer in Mustansir Dalvi's translation, or Iqbal's dialogue with Allah in Khushwant Singh's translation, are written as a complaint or lamentation, shikwa, on the part of all Muslims, addressed to Allah, the Almighty of the Islamic faith. Shikwa e dard sunate hain ki majboor hain hum. I'm sure everyone here has heard these words in the voice of the late Maestro Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, or more recently, the voice of the equally great Fareed Ayaz, who has sung the poem for Coke Studio. Let me remind you of some of its most affecting verses. क्यों ज़ियाकार बनूं सूद फरामोश रहूं, फिक्र फरदा न करूं मैं वे गमे दोष रहूं, नाले बुलबुल के सुनो और हमातन गोश रहूं, हमनवा मैं भी कोई गुल हूं कि खामोश रहूं, जुर्रत आमोज मेरी ताबे सुखन है मुझको, शिकवा अल्लाह से खाकम बदाहन है मुझको, है वजह शिवा ए तस्लीम में माशूर हैं हम, किस्सा ए दर्द सुनाते हैं कि मजबूर हैं हम. Iqbal, representing the voice of all Muslims, takes as his addressee Allah, the All-Powerful. His is a complaint of believers to their God, for they feel let down by Him. They feel that their faith has not been sufficiently rewarded by His mercy or justice. Although the poem is essentially theological, spoken on behalf of all Muslims, through a series of images and metaphors, we also understand very quickly that it is at the same time issuing from India's Muslims, who have their own specific problems with Allah. In other words, it is a political poem, a litany of political theology. हमको जमीयत खातिर ये परेशानी थी, वरना उम्मत तेरे महबूब की दीवानी थी. हमसे पहले था अजब तेरे जहां का मंजर, कहीं मस्जूद थे पत्थर कहीं माबूद शजर, खुगारे पै करे महसूस थी इंसान की नजर, मानता फिर कोई अनदेखे खुदा को क्यों कर. तुझको मालूम है लेता था कोई नाम तेरा, कुव्वते बाजुए मुस्लिम ने किया काम तेरा. बस रहे थे यहाँ सल्जुक भी तुरानी भी, अहले चीन ची में ईरान में सासानी भी, इसी मामूरे में आबाद थे यूनानी भी, इसी दुनिया में यहूदी भी थे नसरानी भी. पर तेरे नाम पे तलवार उठाई किसने, बात जो बिगड़ी हुई थी वो बनाई किसने. These are the questions that Iqbal raises. Muslims here are laying special claim to having done Allah's work in a world full of infidels, unbelievers, and the followers of other faiths, or the believers in other gods. And yet their efforts are not appreciated, and their community faces every sort of trial and tribulation in the world at large. Over the 4 decades following the writing of Shikwa and Jawab, British India would be decolonized, and India and Pakistan emerged as independent nation states in August 1947. Pakistan, the land of the pure, took Iqbal as its national poet and founding father, though Iqbal himself died in 1938 before his dream of a separate homeland for Indian Muslims could be realized. Another one of his poems, Sare Jahan Se Achha Hindustan Hamara, ironically continued to be sung in India as a patriotic anthem of sorts. Mujibur Rahman's book Shikwa-e-Hind carries echoes of Iqbal's poetry. It is a shikwa, a complaint or a lamentation, and it is also a testament to the author's patriotic love for his country, which is not Pakistan but India, Al-Hind, Sare Jahan Se Achha. Because without love there can be no complaint, no lamentation. गिला शिकवा तो अपनों से ही किया जाता है. One can only complain to a beloved, not to a stranger. In this timely yet painful book, the author, like Iqbal before him, speaks on behalf of all the Muslims of India and complains bitterly of the neglect, injustice and abandonment that his community faces at the hands of the power to which it had sworn allegiance and fealty at the time of independence and partition. Not Allah in this case, but the Indian state. And not just a state of whatever description, but very specifically the secular democratic state that was promised by the Constitution of Independent India. It is to the secular state of India that the author addresses his shikwa, his complaint and his lament. It is not the land of the pure neighboring Pakistan that has betrayed the hopes of 200 million Indian Muslims, but India itself, the sovereign, secular, socialist republic that was supposed to guarantee the life, liberty, equality and rights of all its people, regardless of their religion. It is this India that has let down the author's community of co-religionists, and that seems to increasingly treat them, the largest minority, as second-class citizens. A complaint by definition is not an argument. If we move away from the idea of a shikwa as a poetic lament to the definition of a shikwa as a legal complaint, then that initial complaint has to be substantiated by an argument and corroborated with evidence. Rahman prepares a catalogue of setbacks and betrayals suffered by Indian Muslims over the past roughly 40 years, since the Shah Banu judgment and the Babri Masjid demolition in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Up to the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir and the shutting down of the CAA-NRC protests in 2019-20. It should be noted that from the open attacks on mosques and namaz, to the weaponization of cow and beef, conversion and ghar wapsi, hijab and talaq, lynchings and other forms of violent humiliation, verbal abuse and intensified segregation, the misuse of political platforms to intimidate and insult the Muslim community, the selective deployment of anti-terror and national security laws like POTA and UAPA to arrest, interrogate and detain Muslim social activists and political dissenters without bail. All of these forms of persecution faced by Indian Muslims are the result of the capture of the state by the Hindu right and the escalating transformation of public discourse from secularism to majoritarianism. Whether the hollowing out of the idea of equal citizenship is more a failure of secularism or more a triumph of Hindutva remains debatable. But as I said earlier, gile shikwe to apno se hi kiye jate hain. Mujib expresses his unhappiness with Indian secular liberals rather than with Hindu nationalists, because he regards the former as being allies in the quest for dignity in present-day India, with whom minorities like Muslims, Dalits, tribals and others can make common cause. In a sense, secular elites are supposed to be in a better position to represent and speak for disenfranchised communities and to ensure that the polity, economy and cultural spheres remain equitable and egalitarian. But in the past decade, it seems these allies have failed substantially to fight back against the rising tide of populism and authoritarianism. They have allowed the precious Indian Constitution to be compromised, undermined and endangered by ceding its core institutions like the media, the judiciary, the universities and the parliament to the other side. However, the outcome of the recent national election in 2024 may perhaps act as a check on the otherwise alarming deterioration of Indian democracy from secular consensus to majoritarian domination. Mujib's book is subtitled The Political Future of Indian Muslims. To my mind, we should worry about the political future not just of Indian Muslims, but of Indian democracy as a whole. Our democratic process, which was until recently considered robust, resilient and well on its way to long-term stability, has in the past decade shown itself to be vulnerable to hijacking by belligerent fundamentalists. India's rankings on democratic health, have tumbled to the lowest levels ever seen, perhaps since independence, but certainly since liberalization began in the early 1990s. This trend of what could perhaps be called de-democratization is bad, not just for Muslims, though they bear the brunt of it, but also for Dalits, women, religious and cultural minorities, workers and farmers, migrants and refugees, and all those who live on the margins and periphery